So up until now, we've been working with polygons in 3D Studio, and that's great because polygons really are one of 3D Studio's strengths. It's top-notch. It's one of the best poly modelers that there is. So if we have a sphere, just a primitive, standard primitive here, we have this thing called segments, and if I turn on edged faces, we can see those segments. And so as I increase those segments, the sphere is going to have more components to it, and so the sphere looks, smooth from a certain distance with a certain number of segments. But as I get closer to it, then the components of it are going to get revealed, and so I would have to increase the number of segments, and that's one of the weaknesses of polygons. So we're going to talk about some other geometry types that don't have that same kind of limitation. And I'm going to go ahead and go over to modifier list and add this edit mesh modifier to it, and we're going to talk about the sub-objects in detail in a different section of this, but I want to point out that polygon objects, a primitive like this, are made out of individual pieces, and those pieces are vertices, and so you have these individual little points, and then those points are connected by edges. Okay, and then those edges, the space in between, the vertices connected by edges, make up what are called polygons. And that polygon can be an arbitrary number of faces. So this polygon here has 4 sides to it. Now, all polygons, it can have any number of sides that you want, but eventually they're converted into faces here, which are always 3 sides, which are always triangles, and that's how it's passed on to the render as triangles. But at any rate, those are the components of a polygon object. Now you can make different types of objects, and they'll have different types of sub-objects. So if I go back out here to the Create panel, I can come in down here and I have NURB surfaces, patch grids, and there's another type of object in 3D Studio Max called a subdivision surface. So if you come out here to patch grids, well, I can make a quad patch or a tri-patch, and that really only allows me to make planes, which is not particularly exciting. So I'm going to make a patch object a slightly different way. Same with NURB surfaces. I can make a point surface or a CV surface. Again, not really very exciting. So when you're creating these other types of surfaces, it's often better in 3D Studio if you create them from standard poly primitives. So if I make another sphere out here, now that sphere I can right click and I can go convert to, and I can convert it to any one of these types of objects. So we have editable mesh, editable poly, editable patch, and NURBS objects. And an editable mesh and editable poly are very similar, actually. An editable mesh is made up of those triangular faces I was talking about, and so it's a very basic object type, a very basic mesh style. Editable poly, the sub-objects, the polygons, can be have an arbitrary number of sides. Plus, editable poly allows you to create and model in a few more sort of newer modern techniques like edge loop modeling, that sort of thing, and they allow you to immediately convert it into what's called a subdivision surface. So editable mesh is a little bit more kind of old school, and editable poly is a little bit newer. Very similar though. Editable patch, let's convert this to an editable patch, and you'll be able to see what this is. Now an editable patch is used for creating sort of curvy surfaces. Instead of having bunches of little individual flat faces, an editable patch is made up of actual curves. And so my sub-objects for that are vertices. I can choose handles of the vertices because an editable patch, the curve style that editable patch uses are Bezier curves, and so Bezier curves have control points as well as handles. You have edges, and then you do have a patch. So I can look at the vertices here, but you can see I can adjust this object with far fewer vertices, and whatever I do to it, it's always going to be gently curved. It's always going to be nice and curvy. Whereas if I adjusted vertices in the same way with polys. I could have a bunch of hard edges showing and stuff. So editable patches allow you to manipulate an object with just a few control points and still always have a nice curved surface. So you can choose to edit the handles as well, and that controls the vectors of the curves coming off of those vertices. So it's both a direction and a magnitude. So if the handle has a certain direction and also a length, and that influences the direction of the curve that intersects that vertex. And you have edges, and you can pick individual edges. Okay, very similar to edges in poly objects, except that those edges are curves. You can also pick faces. And the good part about editable patch objects is you can model with these things, and so you have you can pick the faces and you can do extrusions on them. And that extrude is now has got a new face on it, but you always have these nice smooth sort of intersections between things.